Welcome, everybody. Feel free to introduce yourself in chat. My name is Karen Krecha, and today you are here with the Autism Empowerment Neurodivergent Creators Collective, and you're joining us for an introduction to independent writing and publishing. This is a beginner-friendly Zoom workshop, and it's being presented by the award-winning author and independent publisher, Brian Tashima. Now, Brian is also the instructor and the program coordinator here for the Autism Empowerment Neurodivergent Creators Collective, and I know that you're going to enjoy what he has to share. For those who were not here last year, this is an encore presentation. So he originally presented in July 2025. Unfortunately, we did that one live. So we had a few technical difficulties and we're just kind of working through the things. So today we are recording and we're excited to have Brian back sharing his insight and wisdom and also give some additional updates on things that have happened since the last year. He's going to be taking you behind the scenes of the independent writing and publishing process and share what he has learned through his experiences as an author. You'll learn things about, as independent authors, how you can independently publish your work and do so while maintaining a nice level of professionalism. And let me just give a little bit of a background and then we'll let Brian go. Brian Tashima is a neurodivergent author, screenwriter, filmmaker, musician, entrepreneur, and philanthropist. He's also the managing general partner of Second Player Score, an arts and entertainment company whose mission is to provide career opportunities within the entertainment industry to people from the autism and neurodivergent communities. His credits include the award-winning Joel Suzuki series, a young adult sci-fi fantasy coming-of-age story about a teenage boy whose autism is the source of his magic. He's also done the manga-style comic book series Glorified and the short local film Hold My Beer. He also serves on the board of directors for Autism Empowerment, and it is such an honor to have him here today. With no further ado, welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Karen, and welcome everyone. I'm glad you're here with us today for my Introduction to Independent Writing and Publishing workshop. All right, so without further ado, we'll just jump right in. As Karen said, feel free to put questions in the chat as we go. I'll be pausing here and there to check with Ryan to see if we have any questions along the way, so feel free to do that. Welcome, everybody. So, you want to write a book. What we're going to talk about today basically covers my experiences as an independent author and publisher. And it'll kind of cover the three phases of getting a book out into the world, which is kind of like production, promotion, and distribution. You're creating the book, telling people about the book, and then getting it out there. So we're going to touch on those subjects. And I think in the beginning, the first thing you need to ask yourself to start with is, why do you want to write a book? I've read a statistic that said something like, I don't know, like 50% of Americans say that they have a book in them or something like that. Just a large number of people who have an idea for a book and who want to write one, but maybe they don't know how to get started or how the process works. I Personally, my process started back in 2010 when my son, who was in middle school at the time, and he was into reading things like Percy Jackson and the Hunger Games, and he came up to me one day and just totally out of the blue said, "Hey, Dad, can you write me a book?" And I was like, "What?" And it was just kind of this, out of the blue request. I mean, I was a musician. I wasn't an author. I'd never written a book before. But I had always wanted to because I'm a huge reader. I'm a fan of the same things that he was a fan of. I've been reading mostly science fiction and fantasy my whole life, ever since I was a kid. But, as I got older, I got into reading other things. So I've always wanted to write a book. In college, I took a creative writing class and I tried writing a book. I got like 40 pages in and I just kind of realized that this is just garbage and I threw it away and I quit. So, but then when my son, many years later, when my son asked me to write a book for him, then that kind of gave me the right amount of inspiration and motivation to get going and finally see a project through. And I think, writing a book it's kind of almost a form of immortality. It's like you're leaving a legacy behind. So whether you want to write something that's fiction, or you want to write a memoir or whatever. It's a kind of a cool thing, a neat accomplishment. And so like for me, it was going to be something that not only that it was a cool thing that I could do for my son at his request, but also because it was something on my bucket list that I always wanted to do, and I could check it off. So it's a good idea to ask yourself why you want to write a book, and because then when you get to the inevitable difficult points, which we'll talk about later, you'll remember what your purpose was in doing this, and then that's going to help you keep going. Like, so for in my case, anytime I felt like, oh God, this is too hard, I just want to stop, I remember, hey, this is for my son. He asked me to do this. I'm going to keep plowing ahead, basically. So, um, my story, I kind of went into the backstory, the origin story of the Joel Suzuki series. Originally, I started just with one book. This was back in 20. I finished writing it in 2011, and it was going to just be something that I was going to finish, give it to my son, and say, call it good. But then I kind of realized that what I had written was not only for him, but it because I had an autistic hero, I thought, hey, this could be he could be a good literary role model for autistic kids everywhere. And since I was already kind of involved in supporting the autistic community through autism empowerment, I thought it would be kind of a good way to kind of help do that as well. So it ended up turning into this 7-book series, which is a whole nother story in and of itself, which I probably won't have time to get to today. But um, anyway, so yeah, so it's a 7-book series, and the last book came out in 2023. I actually have an eighth book. I have a first draft of it finished. So um, anyway, so the question is, do you need previous writing experience or credentials? And the answer really is no. I mean, I think all you need is just a kind of a desire to write. And if you're a avid reader, that kind of helps because a lot of the things, you get the inspiration and the ideas, and like a lot of the stuff that you would read, it kind of filters through you, and it serves as a source of inspiration for your own work. Um, I know a lot of people who think, oh, do I have to get a degree in literature or an MFA or that kind of thing? And it's like the answer really is no, you don't. I mean, most of the independent authors that I know don't have actual, like a degree or anything like that. They just have a love of writing and a love of reading and just a love of the craft. And they do what they study on their own. They attend workshops like this, and where you can learn how to do it. I do know of people who actually have MFAs in, Masters of Fine Arts degrees in creative writing, and they don't actually have any novels written or published because I think maybe sometimes you can get too much into your own head and kind of like overthink it. So um, so yeah, so I would say just a desire to get going is really kind of all that you need. And how I learned to write, my learning style is I tend to do best learning by reading. So what I did was I read books about how to write books. And so that's kind of how I learned how to do it. And other things can work for you depending on what your learning style is. Again, if you want to pursue, a degree, you can do that. There are a lot of good, YouTube videos. A lot of people learn from videos. So you just have to kind of find what suits your learning style and what works for you. So. All right, so we will continue on. So, resources. So for me, like I said, I learned how to write basically from reading books about how to write books. And so these are some of the books I used. The first one on that list, Plot and Structure by James Scott Bell, that was very, very helpful. I strongly recommend that one if your learning style is by reading. Plot and Structure, very good. It kind of walks you through different kinds of the different styles of novels, or and how to structure them, and just really it's really helpful resource. Save the Cat writes a novel is also good by Jessica Brody, who is actually a Vancouver-based author. And there's also the original Save the Cat, which is more for screenwriting, but I found that to be helpful as well. Um, and of course, Stephen King, the master, he has kind of a part memoir, part instructional, book about writing. So it's called On Writing, a Memoir of the Craft. Writing fiction or memoir writing for dummies is also helpful. I love the Dummies series of books. they're very good. I use the writing fiction one, because I didn't write a memoir, but if you're writing a memoir is what you want to do, then there is one of those as well. And then there's a book in a month, which is kind of a little bit more specialized than the other ones. It's how to, like how to stay on track if you want to crank out a manuscript in the span of 1 month, which we'll kind of talk about a little bit more later. But I did buy and read that one. It wasn't as applicable to me as much as the other ones were because I'm not really a speed writer. Some people can crank out many, many words a day. I don't know how they do it, but if you're that kind of person and you have a goal of writing a book very quickly, then that can be helpful to you as well. So. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, so once you've kind of learned, what you're doing, because again, like I said, there were two times when I actually started trying to write a book. Once when I was in college, and then after my son asked me to write a book, I actually dove right in. I started doing it, and I got to about that 40-page mark again, and I realized that I didn't know what I was doing, and this is just total garbage. And so that's when I threw it out, and I started reading, the books about how to write books. And so once I had that knowledge and I was armed with that, then okay, so now the real work begins. And in the beginning, what you need to decide is whether you are going to be a plotter or a pantser. And I'll explain about what those terms mean. A plotter is somebody who writes from an outline. I think maybe if you've written essays in school and the teacher had you write an outline before you started writing, then that's kind of what that is. And a pantser is the word comes from the a concept of writing by the seat of your pants, basically, and that's where you just kind of like, dive in, no outline, just kind of just go right and see where the story takes you. Again, I'm a plotter. I make detailed outlines before I start writing, and in fact, I make like these chapter summaries where I have like kind of like a few paragraphs of what's going to happen in each chapter as it goes along. So I outline the structure of the book based on the plot and structure book that I talked about. You have to hit certain points, certain kind of like benchmarks or checkpoints along the way. And like there's a certain structure to how a good story is built. So like at a certain point, like something needs to happen by here, and then something needs to be happen by here. So like I'll actually outline that and fill in my chapter summaries, make sure I hit all the correct beats as I go along, and then just kind of revise my outline until it's at a point where I can work off of it. And that really works for me because I like to be kind of organized. I like to know like where I'm going. I like to see where the road signs are. So that works for me. As far as pantsers, I think the most famous example of that is Stephen King again, who just kind of he just dives right in and he doesn't know where the story is going to take him. He just kind of keeps going. And obviously it works for him. So so if that's your style, then you can do that. You can do that as well. So I think deciding what your style is when you begin is good is helpful.
Wait, this since
Yes.
I figure this is a good time. We also have another question in the chat,
Okay.
asking about what are your thoughts on dictation for dictation or voice notes when you're writing.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, if that's a tool that will help you to write, then yeah, I mean, you should use whatever, whatever tools are available to you. I think, that's it that you find helpful. So yeah, I mean, if that helps you to write, then by all means, I I'm all for it. Okay, so setting goals. So you want to know, like, so I think that it kind of helps if you want to stay on track. Like say. Like what I did in the beginning was I set a daily word count goal of 400 words. Well, it's like 250 words is about one page. So in the beginning, I said, okay, I'm going to do like 400 or like 500 words a day, like kind of like 2 pages, and then that's going to be my goal to, keep doing that on a daily basis until I can get the manuscript done. So you can do that, or you can set yourself a goal like, okay, well, in 4 months or whatever it is, I want to get it done. But having a goal will help you stay on track. And then we'll talk about that a little bit more later. As far as overcoming writer's block, I have two main strategies for doing that. And I go into a little bit more detail on, I have some videos on the Autism Empowerment YouTube channels, and I will talk about that near the end of the presentation. But my two main strategies for overcoming writer's block, one is I call it the shopping for shoes strategy, which is where when you sit down to work to write for the day. The hardest part, I think, is getting started. Like it's this thing called activation energy, I guess, which I'm not a scientist, but I guess according to science, like the hardest part about doing anything is getting started. So like it takes the most energy to start your car, but then once you start it, then it takes less energy to run. So to get yourself started, if you find yourself staring at a blank page, like I often did, what I would do is I would just write my characters basically doing anything. Like, maybe yesterday I left off with them in a dungeon fighting a monster, but I don't know where to go with that today. So what I'll do is I'll just write about them, going to the mall to shop for shoes or like, eating cereal for breakfast or just any kind of just whatever nonsense it is, just to kind of get myself into the flow of writing. And I think, like once you start doing that, then you can always cut that out later. You can cut that, put it aside. Don't delete it. What I would do is I would take all that stuff that I wrote just kind of, get myself activated, and I would put it in a separate document that I called cutting room floor. And then I ended up like with this long document of all this stuff that I just, wrote it was going to throw away. But you can go back later and sometimes some of the stuff that you did write, you can repurpose it and like, find, oh, hey, like maybe you're looking for an idea at a certain point and later on in the book, and it's like, hey, remember that thing I wrote just as, just to get myself going 2 weeks ago? That would actually fit here. So you can go back to your cutting room document, pull it out and use it for that. So, and then the second strategy for overcoming writer's block that I found helpful for me was I call it my own biggest fan, which is where I would go back and I would actually like read the stuff that I wrote the previous day, almost like just for fun. I wouldn't even like do any editing of it because I don't really believe in doing a lot of editing the first time through. You just kind of want to get the words out on the page and then go back and edit and revise later. So I would like read what I wrote the previous day, almost for just an enjoyment. And then that would kind of get me into the flow of the story. And then so, and once I would catch up to where I was, it's almost like you're thinking, oh, wow, that's kind of cool. That's kind of neat. Like, what happens next? Like, oh, wait a minute, I'm the writer. I get to say what happens next. So that was a strategy that was helpful for me. Um, and as far as staying on track and then being able to, make sure you finish your book, again, I have about like five strategies for that, which, in the interest of time, I'm just gonna go over a couple. And if you want, you can go watch. I have a video about that on the Autism Empowerment resource page on the YouTube, so you can see it there. But um, basically, I think a couple of things that really helped for me was to make writing part of my daily routine. Make it part of your habit, like like brushing your teeth or taking a shower or whatever. Just something that you do every day. It's like I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this, and oh yeah, and then I'm gonna write. Even if it's just like writing like one paragraph, even if you don't have too much time, like it'd be nice to meet your word count goal for the day. But even if you just have the time to write, like I said, like a couple of sentences, one paragraph, as long as you did it, you can check it off for the, okay, so I did that every day, and then it becomes a habit, becomes part of your routine, and it becomes easier to keep that going as you go along. And so I'm going to talk about NaNoWriMo, which is a challenge that it was this thing that some people created some years ago where in November uh, you were supposed to write an entire manuscript in that month. And that kind of goes back to that book about, like book in a month. And it was a kind of this challenge that, they would put out to people every year. I think they stopped doing it a few years ago, but like I said it before, if that's something that is interesting to you, as far as being able to like write a lot, or if that's what motivates you to kind of finish, then you can kind of like simulate what they used to do with NaNoWriMo and challenge yourself to finish your book in 1 month, in which case you want to go back and look at that book in a month book that I recommended earlier. So okay, so we're gonna before we go on, Ryan, any questions?
Yeah. We have a couple questions.
Okay.
First question is, and I suspect I think the answer is probably yes here, but is it possible to be both a plotter and a pantser? I have experience with both. That's the
It
first question.
definitely is. It definitely is. I think, like even with me, as far as being a plotter, I was kind of like a little bit of a hybrid, like where sometimes I would get into a chapter and then like even if I had the chapter summary and saying what my character should be doing, a lot of times the characters they have minds of their own and they're like, no, Brian, that's dumb, we're gonna go off and do this thing instead. We're gonna, and like they're like, whoa, like they just kind of like the story will unfold in a different way than I expected, but then I just kind of follow that and I just kind of, okay, I'm not gonna be so rigid as to say, okay, no, I'm just deviating from my outline. If it feels like that's where it should be going, then that's where I'm gonna I'll follow that as far as it goes. So yeah, you can kind of take like a hybrid approach. And even like for the my eighth book that I just did, I decided that okay, I wrote 7 books doing the plotter way. I'm gonna write this one doing the pantser way, and it actually worked this time. Like I tried to be a pantser with my second book, and I got like halfway in, and it was just garbage, so I tossed it out. I went back to an outline. But I think now that I have more experience, then the pantser method kind of worked for me with the eighth book. So yeah, so long answer to the question, I think you
Yeah.
can definitely do both. So.
And then one more question is how do you organize your thoughts when you have like thousands of notes, voice memos, anything of that sort?
Ooh, that is a good question. I think that's where it kind of goes back to, well, having an outline is helpful because then even if you have a lot of these different thoughts, you're kind of, you have to try to stay on track with where you think your story should be going. Or if you're doing kind of the more the pantser method, what I actually did, with the eighth book is, I would just kind of write everything, and then if I had an idea, and I had these other ideas that weren't like really kind of fitting with what I was doing at the time, I would put those in a separate document. So like I would have like 2 documents running at the same time, like the actual manuscript, and then like all these other ideas that I had. And then every so often you kind of like go back and say, okay, well, does this idea fit here? Or, can I use that there? You just kind of like see as you go along if where those ideas might fit, and then that way you have it recorded, and even if you don't use them you can always go back to them later. So yeah, I would just
Sounds
write
good.
everything down. Okay,
Oh yeah.
let's move on. So your manuscript is done, or at least you think it is. Once the first draft is done, then you still have a ways to go, I'm sorry to say, because generally the first draft is going to be, for the most part, not great, and that's okay. That's how it should be. You want to get the words down on paper because, as they say, you can't edit a blank page. You need to have something to work with. Like your first draft will be your clay, your ball of clay that now you're going to mold and refine into a statue or whatever it is. So um, you're going to want to do probably like multiple passes yourself of editing. Like I'll do after I finish the first draft, I'll go through, I'll do kind of like a cleanup edit where I just kind of like fix certain thing, fix like obvious things, spelling errors, punctuation, grammar, stuff like that. And then I'll do like another pass for story. Like when you find plot holes and you're like, oh, like this doesn't make sense, but this doesn't connect with there. I have to fix that. So like, I will personally do, I don't know, maybe upwards of 20, 25, editing passes myself. And then you're going to want to have other eyes look at it as well. Different things you can do are what's called beta readers, which you will have, maybe you enlist friends or in my case, or a lot of authors I know, they're members of like writing groups with other authors, and then you would exchange exchange manuscripts and be each other's beta readers, and you read the early manuscripts and you offer advice and feedback and suggestions. Um, and also another thing I would highly recommend is hiring a professional editor. I did that for all of my books. It can be kind of expensive, so it depends on what your budget is. If you can afford it, I would really highly recommend it, um, because then that's how you make sure that your work is on par with like books that come out from like major traditional publishers. Especially if you're going to be an independent author, I think it's important to have as clean of a product as you can because a lot of the stigma that is associated or was associated with independent or self-publishing is that people wouldn't really bother to do a lot of editing, and they would put product out in the market that had like it was just riddled with errors. It looked really amateurish, and it was really amateurish basically. And so a lot of people would be like, oh, self-published, man. But fortunately, it's come a long way, and so there's not as much of a stigma as before because now independent authors are smarter and they know that okay, I need to really put the effort in and make sure that this is a quality product. So, um, so if you can afford it, I would really highly suggest hiring a professional editor. Also, sensitivity readers are something that's important to consider, especially if you're writing characters that maybe are from represent a group that maybe you may not be as familiar with. Like for me, when I first started writing the Joel Suzuki series, my main characters were on the autism spectrum. At the time, I didn't know I was on the spectrum myself. So even though later on I found out that I was, but so I asked Karen Kreitcha, if she would be gracious enough to be my sensitivity reader. So that was very helpful, and she was able to, like say, steer me in the right direction as far as making sure that my portrayals of autistic characters was, respectful and accurate, and make sure I was on point with that. So she was very helpful. So I would suggest doing that. I have like an author friend who wrote a book about a character who is blind, and the author is not blind herself, but what she did was she actually kind of like entrenched herself with a school, with for the blind with blind students, and kind of like like went to their school alongside them for like a couple of months actually to kind of like just really kind of be able to understand and be able to see be able to perceive things from their perspective. So that's an example of something that you would do in case you do have groups that are represented that maybe you're not as familiar with. And again, like I said, revise, rewrite, revise, rewrite. Like I said, I did mine like 20, 25 times. So it's a long process, but again, it's very rewarding, I think, in the end, when you have your finished product and you have something, something cool to show for it. All right, we'll move on to the next. How are we doing on time? Okay, we're doing pretty good. Um, so once you do have a finished polished product that you're pretty sure is done, and and the thing is, believe me, like you're gonna feel like it's never done, but at some point you're gonna have to say, okay, this is as good as I think I can get this, and I like it, I'm happy with it, and if you can get it to that point and polish it to the point where you feel happy and satisfied with it, then okay, then you're ready to publish your book or get your book published. And once you're at that point, I think you have you have two choices. You can go the independent self-publishing route, or you can try to pursue what's called traditional publishing, which is to get your book published by one of like either one of the big five publishers or like a small press. Um, and both routes have their pros and cons, and they have their advantages, disadvantages, challenges. If you want to go the traditional route, and I tried to do that at first, but the thing is, you will need to get a literary agent to begin with. So you're going to have to like query agents, and what that involves is, looking up, finding agents that represent books that are in your genre, and basically sending them, emails saying, pitching them your book. This is, there are lots of examples on the internet of good query letters you can find. And basically you're just kind of, telling them, hey, I wrote, this book, it's about so and so, like, and can I send you, like my first 5 pages or something like that. So it's a very long road. Like I queried 20 agents when I started with my first book, and I either got turned down or ghosted by all of them. And so I'm not good with rejections. So I was like, okay, I'm done with that. I'm going to go the self-publishing route. Other authors that I know send out like hundreds and hundreds of queries. I don't know how they do it, but sometimes that works because it's kind of like a numbers game. And if you do find an agent, then they have to then sell your book to a publisher, and that's another long process in and of itself. So if you go the traditional route, on average, it's going to take years from the time that you start querying to the time you actually see your book, on the shelf or on, on the internet. Again, I'm not good with rejection, and I was also I felt like I had an important story and an important message that I wanted to get out into the world as soon as possible. I didn't want to wait, the 5 to 7 years or whatever that, it would probably have taken if I kind of persisted with the traditional route. So I decided to go independent. And I had some business experience. Actually have my college degree is in business. And I actually used to run an independent record label when I play in bands. I'm a musician, so I actually started a record label at one point to, put up my band's albums and my friends' band's albums and things. So, I had some experience and knowledge with business. So I thought, okay, well, because I had that experience, and I was kind of confident in my ability to be able to do this on my own. If, business is not your thing, then independent publishing might not be for you because they were basically like a small business owner once you decide to do self-publishing. And so, you have to take care of all those little details yourself, as far as, setting up a business, paying taxes, reporting, all that kind of stuff. With traditional publishing, they actually do rely on the author to do a lot of their own stuff more so than before. But that's mostly in like publicity and marketing. The traditional publisher will still handle, like the royalty payments and stuff like that for you. So it's kind of like I said, there's pros and cons to both approaches. You have to kind of decide which is best for you. Um, and so, like I said, yeah, so there's a lot of business considerations to take into account. Production, if you do go the independent publishing route, then you have several options. Most people go through Amazon has the thing called, they have a platform called KDP. It used to be called CreateSpace. And with KDP, it's basically like you would upload your manuscript and then your cover art, and then it's pretty intuitive. The process is pretty simple to walk through. And then once you get it all put together, then you can then publish your book on Amazon. The thing is, you have to be the one thing you're gonna have to learn there is you have to learn how to do formatting because in order to have your book come out looking like a book, you have to make sure your manuscript is formatted to certain specifications. You have to make sure your cover art is also formatted to specifications. And again, if you don't like those kinds of details, then self-publishing may not be for you. Traditional publishing, they handle that kind of stuff for you. But I was okay with that. There's also other options like you have like service companies who will do the formatting for you. Like I found a company that like I did the print book formatting myself. But with the ebook version, that's a whole nother animal, and that's like a lot more complicated to format. So I ended up outsourcing that to a company that does book formatting. So I think it cost me like $150 or $200 to have them format my manuscript for electronic for ebooks. So so you can find people to do that for you if that's not something that you like to do yourself. Other production options, and sometimes you can do like these at the same time. Like there's Ingram Spark, which is sort of the like the indie arm of Ingram, and you need to use Ingram Spark if you want to get your books into libraries and bookstores. Like libraries and bookstores will not order from Amazon. Amazon is you're just going straight to the reader. If you want to get your books into like Barnes and Noble or into libraries, they will only order from Ingram Spark if you are an independent author. So I did both. I went Amazon, so I could reach people directly, and I went to Ingram Spark as well. And you can do multiple platforms. There's also Smashwords, which I tried. It wasn't really for me, but it works well for some people. So those are some production options. And this, like I said, distribution. If you're on Amazon, that's an obvious distribution arm in and of itself. You can also do like a consignment. Like I did that with like local bookstores, where I would go to independent bookstores around my local area, and then just have them stock my books on consignment, where if they sell the book, then they'll pay, they'll pay you part of, whatever the profit was. And so those are a couple of different options for distribution. And once you have your book made and available for people to buy, then you have to think about, well, how do I let people know that my book is actually out there? I say this is not Field of Dreams because it's not a situation where if you build it, they will come. You may have like you may be the greatest writer in the history of the world, and you may have the most awesome book in the history of the world, but if people don't know anything about it, they don't know it's there, they don't know it's available, then they'll never read it, they'll never find it. So you have to promote your work. You have to let people know that it's out there, and there are lots of different ways to do that. You can there's so many different ideas. You can like go on podcasts. You can be a guest on podcast. You can like be a guest, or you can approach blogs to write about your book. You can even write your own blog. And a lot of times, what you should consider is think about like, well, what is my do I have a niche, or do I have a little hook, a built-in hook to what you're doing? So like, for me, it was because I had autistic lead characters, I could talk about how, like my characters were they were positive examples or positive role models of people on the autism spectrum, because a lot of the books that I had read up until the point when I started writing my books that had autistic characters, their autism was kind of an obstacle that they had to overcome to reach their goals. I wanted mine to be more positive, where my character's autism was kind of the reason they were able to save the day. So, so I would pitch it to, not only like blogs or outlets, publicity outlets that would were just for books, but also for places that talk about autism or disability or things like that. So, just kind of you want to kind of like find different niches where that people might be interested in hearing about your book. I heard about a self-published author who wrote a vampire book, and so she approached the blood bank about doing a cross promotion with them, which I thought was a great idea. So, you be creative, kind of come up with different things, different ideas to get the word out. I could talk about promotion for a very, very long time, but I think we're already running short on time. So, we're going to pause here to see if there are any questions. Ryan.
We have a couple questions. The
Okay.
first question is about costs, and they ask if you are considering self-publishing, what kind of budget should you be looking at to start with?
Ooh, good question. I think for me, a lot of my budget went into editing and cover art and formatting. So, like with my editor, like the cost of editing kept going up every single year, and I think with my seventh book, it finally reached a point where it was like $2,500. And I would do like two rounds of editing with my editor. Like one was a story edit where she would, check for big picture stories, like plot holes and things like that. And then the second edit was what's called like a copy edit or a line edit, where she would, check for, the more mechanical things like, spelling, like punctuation, grammar, sentence structure, all that kind of stuff. So, so my editing budget was like, 5 grand, which when I think about it is kind of bonkers. But, and then like for my cover art, I would spend, it was like about, like, I think I paid my artist like $250, and 150 bucks for the formatting for the ebook. So I was looking at a budget, somewhere between, and like promotion as well, because I have a website that I have to maintain. So I was looking at a budget of about maybe 6, 7 grand per book, maybe more. Like at one point, I hired a book marketing consultant off of Upwork for $1,000 to promote my book, and I basically got zero sales out of it. So I thought, I'm gonna take a chance. But so, I mean, you can adjust your budget to kind of fit whatever it is you want to do. I would say if you have a limited amount of money to spend, put most of it into editing because you want to make sure you have the best possible product out there. Like something you can find cover art for cheaper. Maybe you could maybe even find editing for cheaper if you like like go to if you have go to like a college and see if there are like any kind of students there studying, and they could be kind of a project for them. You may not get as much quality out of it but it might be like less expensive. But I would say put most of your money in editing if you have a limited budget. So um
And then one
Any
other
other?
question
Yep.
is asking about different platforms, asking about what what did you not like about Smashwords, and which of the platforms were the easiest to learn and produce?
I mean, there was nothing wrong with it. I think it just wasn't, I don't know, it just wasn't a fit for my style, I think, like, the way I like to do things. So, I mean, there was nothing really wrong with it. I think it's just like, sometimes you find things that, like, I just, this isn't for me. That's kind of what it was, So, so you may try Smashwords and you may love it. It might be perfect for you. So it was more of a style thing. So. Okay, so while we're on the subject of promotion, this is a new thing that I'm going to talk about that I didn't talk about when I did this presentation last year, but we're going to talk about book talk real quickly. You may have heard about this. If you're on TikTok, book talk is like a sub community of TikTok where you have like authors and readers like talking about books. Like authors will talk about their books, readers will talk about books that they like, and it's kind of this whole subculture or sub community on there. And I heard in the last couple of years that it started to get really, really popular, and like some authors were just really kind of like blowing up on Book Talk, and like some people were able to get such a big following and such a big audience that they were able to like quit their jobs and pursue writing full time. I was like, whoa, like maybe I should look into that some more. Um, and to be honest, like I was definitely afraid of TikTok. I'm afraid of the internet in general, but like TikTok to me was especially intimidating. I had never really used it. I heard of it and I heard what it was kind of about. And I was just like, oh boy, I don't know. I was honestly, I was pretty scared to get into it, but so, but like the one of the actor who was the lead actor for my film that I did last year, he was a big TikTok user, and he was telling me, Brian, you really got to think about getting on TikTok and doing this book talk thing. So like, him saying that combined with what I was hearing about it, from other sources, like, okay, I think maybe I should give this thing a shot. So last August, a couple of months after I did this presentation originally, I took the plunge and I created a TikTok account and I started just making videos. I would like post a video every day. I had heard that, you know, to get optimal results, you want to do at least once a day, up to like 3 or 4 times a day. And I was like, wow, okay, I'm just gonna do one a day and see how that goes. And like I said, I was pretty intimidated by it. I was thinking, I was worried like, am I gonna get flamed? Is this, how are people gonna react to this? But I was pleasantly surprised that everybody was like super cool. Like, like everybody was nice and very supportive. And, you know, um, I don't, I don't get a lot of views on my videos, but, the people that do watch my videos have been really nice. They leave nice comments, and apparently I get a pretty high proportion of likes to views, so that's pretty good. So I think, it hasn't resulted in any kind of like, major book sales or anybody coming to me and, like offering me a deal or anything like that. But the thing that it's been good for me is it's served as kind of a like a virtual book coach, which is something I should have mentioned before as far as helping you stay on track, but like accountability is really important as far as being able to stay on track and getting your book done. I think if you feel like you're writing for somebody, then it kind of gives you the incentive to kind of keep going. So even on the days where you feel like I just don't feel like writing, if you're writing for someone and you feel like, okay, well, even if it's just a friend or somebody who will check in on you every week and say, hey, how did your writing go this week? Did you meet your goals? And you can say, yeah, I did. So Book Talk or TikTok ended up being kind of a virtual book coach for me. And because every day I would post a video about, okay, yesterday I wrote, 400 words and, so now I'm up to like 10,000 words and I'm going to keep going, and because of that, I was actually able to finish the first draft of the volume 8, my new book, in 3 months, which was like a record for me. Thank you. So, like my previous record was with volume 1, where I wrote that manuscript in 4 months, and that was because I kind of had that story in my head for like a year. The other books took me, at least like 6 months to a year or longer to finish the first draft. But like with volume 8. I was able to finish that in 3 months again because I was posting every day to TikTok and I didn't want to go on and say, I didn't do anything yesterday. Sorry. I wanted to tell my my meager amount of TikTok followers that, hey, I did this yesterday, so thanks for keeping me on track. So I think that was really helpful for that. So you may try it. Your experience may differ from mine. I mean, you may blow up and get 1 million followers, you may go viral, or you may use it as a virtual book coach as well to help you write your book. And if you are on TikTok, I have my TikTok handle there at the bottom of the slide. I usually don't follow back people that I don't know, but if you say you were at my workshop, I will follow you back. Let's trade follows. So, okay, so that was a quick word about book talk. Any questions, Ryan?
Doesn't appear to be any questions right now, so we can
Okay,
keep
good.
going.
All right, well, we are right on time. We have about 9 minutes left. So what's next? So say you finish the book, you have it published, it's out in the world. You can either, if that's your goal and you say, okay, I did it, I accomplished it, I'm done, then congratulations, good job. Or you can just keep writing. Like if your goal really is to, become, like if you want to pursue a career as an author or a writer, the best advice I can give is to just keep writing. Like they always say that like the best way to sell your first book is to write your second book, and you just keep going, because you never know, right? Um, even if maybe the reception to your first book wasn't as much as you had hoped, maybe the next one will be that, and then that will ignite sales of your back catalog. So, just keep writing, keep publishing, keep going. If that's what it is you want to do. If you're writing just for fun and you just wanted to get one book out into the world, then that's great too. So. Yeah, so be sure to check out more resources at this address here that I've put on the slide. Like I said, I have videos about how to finish your novel where I go into more into depth of the different ways to do that. The video talking about overcoming writer's block, and there's some other good resources there. The presentation actually will be on there as well, later on. So, okay, cool, cool, cool. Yeah, so this is kind of the end. Any questions? Any comments?
Uh, I just want to jump. We have one more
The
question
you
from in the chat.
yes.
Okay.
Brian, what's your next plan for the books that you're planning to write, if you can share?
Yeah, thanks. Good question. Well, like I said, I finished the first draft of volume 8 and I did a first pass edit on it. I don't currently have the funds to pay for editing, to pay my editor for it, so I'm going to put volume 8 on hold. I actually started writing volume 9. I got like 20,000 words into that. But then I pivoted to I want to produce a stage play adaptation of the first book in my series. So I'm working on that. I wrote the script for it, and I'm going to work on getting trying to find like a director and people who are involved in theater, because I actually have no experience myself in live theater. So yeah, so that's my current project. But right, okay, so we have like just a couple minutes left. So upcoming workshops, we have pre-production planning for filmmaking on Saturday, July 25th at 2 p.m. Pacific with Edward Martin III of Hellbender Media. He'll be making a return visit. He was actually here for a low-budget filmmaking workshop a few months ago, and it was so popular and so in-depth, and we had so many things to talk about. And pre-production planning was something that a lot of people were asking about. If you're interested in filmmaking, it's sort of the process that goes into like before you actually start shooting, all the things that you need to line up and plan, because filmmaking is like logistics. You have to know a lot of details, and so Edward will do a deeper dive into that stage of the process. And then in August, on Saturday, August 22nd, we'll be doing documentary filmmaking with my friend and any Emmy-winning filmmaker, Beth Harrington, who is also local to the Vancouver, Washington area. Beth is great. She's terrific. She's extremely talented filmmaker. She'll be talking. She has 2 films out right now, making all the festival rounds. She's really crushing it out there and doing a great job. So I'm really looking forward to that. We've had a lot of member interest and questions about documentaries in particular, so I think that's going to be very insightful. She has a long history of filmmaking and of documentary filmmaking, so she'll have a lot of good things to say about that. And we also have our usual chill and chat sessions on every first Saturday of the month, in which our members come together and just talk about your projects, swap ideas. Micah, you might want to come to that. You can talk to us more about your project. The next one is not going to be on the first Saturday of July because that is July the 4th, but it's going to be on July 11th. And if you're on our mailing list, you will get an invite to that with the Zoom link. And the next one in August is not on August 1st because we have our Autism Empowerment Picnic that day, so it will be on August 8th. But then after that, we'll return to our regular schedule of the first Saturday of every month. Okay, I think I came in right on time. I think it's 2:59. So yeah, so thank you very much,
Brian,
everyone. Karen?
you did a great job. Thank you so much. If anybody didn't get a chance to have their questions answered, please feel free to connect with us. We are going to end this for time, but Brian has now put up the connection on the screen. And I also wanted to mention that all past workshops, including this one, are available for you to watch on our YouTube channel. And you can actually do that. They're also embedded in our website. So if you go to our website and go to the AE-NCC section, you can go to upcoming events, past events, and our library, and you'll be able to connect with all the goodness. Feel free to drop Brian an email in case you have any other questions. And if you're a Facebook person, join us for our Facebook group.